I'll never forget the look on Patricia Kelner's face when she realized she just cannonballed into my pool right next to Sheriff Tom Brennan. The woman who'd spent 6 months harassing me about pool regulations was suddenly treading water next to a man wearing swim trunks and a waterproof badge holder. Her shriek probably violated 3 noise ordinances she'd written herself. My name is Jake Morrison, and I'm a 35-year-old software developer who made the terrible mistake of installing a pool in Pine Ridge Estates without kissing the ring of our HOA president first. I'd followed every city permit requirement, hired licensed contractors, and stayed well within property setbacks. But apparently, I'd committed the cardinal sin of not consulting Patricia Kelner, self-appointed guardian of suburban excellence. Patricia was 57 years old with hair so perfectly styled it could withstand hurricane-force winds. She ran our HOA like a military dictatorship, measuring grass height with a ruler and issuing citations for mailboxes that were 2 shades off from approved beige. When I moved in 3 months ago, she'd actually hand-delivered a 60-page binder of rules, regulations, and what she called friendly suggestions that were clearly threats. The pool installation had been completely legal. I'd pulled permits from the city, had it inspected twice, and even made sure the fence exceeded code requirements. But 2 days after the concrete was poured, Patricia showed up at my door with a clipboard and a scowl that could curdle milk. She informed me that all exterior modifications required HOA approval, and my pool was in violation of subsection 12.3 of the architectural guidelines. I showed her my permits. She said city approval didn't override HOA rules. I showed her the HOA bylaws that said pools were allowed with proper permitting. She claimed I'd misinterpreted the language. This went back and forth for 20 minutes until I politely closed the door in her face. That's when the real harassment began. First came the citations. My pool equipment was too loud, even though it was the same model half the neighborhood used. My pool lights were too bright, despite being on a timer that shut them off at 9 p.m. She even cited me for excessive water evaporation contributing to local humidity levels. That last one wasn't even a real violation, she just made it up and added it to the books during an emergency board meeting. Then came the trespassing. I started finding wet footprints around my pool in the early morning. My pool net would be moved. Once, I found a pH testing strip floating in the water. I installed security cameras and caught Patricia jumping my fence at 5:30 a.m. with a water testing kit and a measuring tape. She was actually taking samples of my pool water and measuring the distance from my pool edge to the property line. When I confronted her with the footage, she claimed she had authority as HOA president to inspect any property for compliance. I told her that was absolutely false and possibly criminal. She laughed and said I could try to prove it in court, but the HOA would bury me in legal fees first. That's when I called my friend Tom Brennan. Tom had been sheriff for 15 years and happened to owe me a favor after I'd helped recover his department's data from a ransomware attack pro bono. When I explained the situation, he was more than happy to help. We came up with a simple plan. I'd host a small barbecue. Tom would come swim, and we'd wait for Patricia to take the bait. I made sure to post about the barbecue on the neighborhood Facebook page, mentioning I'd be testing my new pool float bar and cranking up my definitely not too loud sound system. Patricia commented within minutes that she'd be monitoring the situation for violations. Perfect. That Saturday afternoon, Tom arrived in swim trunks and a Hawaiian shirt, looking like any other weekend guest. My neighbor Dave came over with his family, and we had a perfectly normal suburban pool party. Tom was floating in the deep end with a root beer when we heard the fence rattle. Patricia didn't just climb over, she practically vaulted it with the athleticism of someone who'd been doing this regularly. She was wearing what I can only describe as tactical pool wear, quick dry pants and a moisture-wicking polo with the HOA logo she'd had embroidered herself. She had her phone in one hand, recording, and her clipboard in the other. She marched straight to the pool edge and started shouting about unauthorized gatherings and excessive splashing metrics. Then, mid-rant, she slipped on a wet spot and tumbled straight into the deep end with a splash that definitely exceeded her own noise regulations. When she surfaced, she was face to face with Tom, who was calmly floating there with his sheriff's badge now very visible on his chest. The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint right there in the chlorinated water. Tom helped her to the pool ladder with professional courtesy while informing her she was under arrest for criminal trespass. Patricia started sputtering about HOA authority and inspection rights, but Tom just shook his head and explained that HOA rules don't supersede criminal law. She tried to claim I'd entrapped her, but Tom pointed out that nobody had invited her to jump my fence and fall into my pool. She'd done that entirely on her own. As Tom was leading her away in handcuffs, still dripping pool water, she screamed that the entire HOA board would hear about this. I told her I was counting on it. The arrest video from my security camera went viral in our neighborhood Facebook group within hours. Turns out, Patricia had been trespassing in lots of yards, always claiming HOA inspection privileges. My neighbor Janet revealed Patricia had been in her hot tub at 6 a.m., checking chemical levels. Another neighbor, Bill, said he'd caught her measuring his garden gnome placement with a protractor. The criminal case was swift. Patricia was charged with criminal trespass, harassment, and stalking. Her lawyer tried to argue she had implied consent as HOA president, but the judge literally laughed and said that's not how property law works. The prosecutor also revealed Patricia had been using HOA funds to purchase surveillance equipment and water testing supplies for her personal vendettas, adding embezzlement to her charges. During the trial, more disturbing details emerged. Patricia had a notebook with detailed records of every pool in the neighborhood, including charts of when residents were typically away and optimal fence jumping routes. She'd been systematically trespassing for 3 years, long before I'd even moved in. The judge called it one of the most bizarre cases of serial trespassing he'd ever seen. The HOA board held an emergency meeting to distance themselves from Patricia. They claimed they'd never authorized her inspections and were shocked by her behavior. However, emails surfaced showing they'd known about and tacitly encouraged her aggressive enforcement tactics until it became legally problematic. The entire board ended up resigning in disgrace. Patricia's professional life crumbled, too. She worked as an office manager for a local insurance company, and they fired her immediately after the arrest made the local news. Apparently, having an employee convicted of serial trespassing wasn't great for an insurance company's reputation. Her husband filed for divorce 2 weeks later, citing extreme embarrassment and the fact that she'd spent their savings on legal fees. The civil lawsuit I filed was even more satisfying than the criminal case. My lawyer argued that Patricia had violated my civil rights, caused emotional distress, and decreased my property value through her harassment campaign. We had mountains of evidence, including the videos, her own detailed trespassing logs, and testimony from dozens of neighbors she'd similarly harassed. The jury awarded me $75,000 in damages, plus legal fees. Patricia had to sell her house to pay the judgment. The new HOA board also settled separately for $30,000 to avoid being named in additional lawsuits from other residents. I donated half of the settlement to a legal aid society that helps people fight HOA abuse. But the best part came during sentencing for the criminal charges. The judge, clearly fed up with Patricia's complete lack of remorse, sentenced her to 6 months in jail, 3 years probation, and 500 hours of community service specifically focused on respecting private property rights. She also got a restraining order preventing her from coming within 500 feet of any private pool in the county. Patricia's jaw dropped when the judge read the sentence. She actually stammered that this was impossible because she lived in Florida, where pools were everywhere. The judge reminded her that should have been a consideration before she became a serial pool trespasser. Her lawyer tried to argue for house arrest instead, but the judge pointed out that Patricia had proven she couldn't respect the boundaries of houses either. As court officers led Patricia away to begin her jail sentence, she turned and glared at me with pure hatred. Then she noticed Sheriff Tom Brennan sitting in the gallery, and her face crumbled into defeat. The woman who terrorized an entire neighborhood with her pool patrol power trips was heading to a facility with communal showers and zero privacy. The irony was delicious. She served 4 months of her 6-month sentence before being released on good behavior. Last I heard, she'd moved to Arizona and was living in an apartment complex with no pool, no HOA, and definitely no authority over anyone's backyard.